no matter what decisions I made that goes outside of God's created order is still God's created order. And so when I had to come to the terms of like, all right, so it does go my wife and my children.
Look, it's me and you against the world, girl, and I ain't talking slick. Others may have said it, but they worldview was midget. That means it wasn't big enough for what life would experience.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of
It's the Tanks.
Yes, Les, it is the Tanks. And we're excited to be here with you guys again to bring you more of our life journey and lessons as we went from asking for a divorce, coming back from a honeymoon to celebrating this year.
10 years of marriage.
10 years of marriage. You heard it right. We asked for that divorce. And now we're about to celebrate 10 years of marriage. And if you've been journeying with us those first 6 episodes, you've learned all about it and figured out how we got here. If you're joining us for the first time, you're going to want to go back and catch up and watch those other 6 episodes to get the context. And while you're doing that, do us another favor and hit the like button, the share button, the subscribe button.
All the buttons.
All the buttons. All of the buttons. Listen, I think this episode, we're going to talk about a subject that actually a lot of people don't talk about a lot, when it's actually a lot more common than it used to be.
Correct.
And we're going to talk about the idea of a blended family. You guys know that when my wife married me, she inherited 2 children. I had 2 daughters prior to marriage, prior to Christ. And now we about to get married and we got to figure out how to blend this family, how to have children that are not my wife now while she is my wife. And what does that look like? What does that look like parenting wise? What does that look like relationship wise? Because we obviously know that God had an original order for things and we're not in that order right now. So how do you figure that out? How do you navigate that? And the reality is the percentage of people who are now remarried coming in with families is a lot higher than before. And I really think this is a subject that many people need to be touching on more, or marriage books need to be talking about a lot more, because it's a norm now. And so we want to talk about it because obviously within that hot spot of our marriage where everything was just chaotic, we had to also figure out how to navigate this. And this actually became one of like our first arguments in like premarital. What was the extent of it?
I'm not really sure what the original frustration was or what the original point of contentment was, but whatever is centered on the idea of who is first, like that idea of who is first in our relationship. Like for me, getting married or being together, who I would have thought first would always have been you. But it was different for you. And
so for me, coming into a marriage, already with my daughters, already with a 5-year-old, already with a 2-year-old, it's always been my daughters, you know. And so I'm like, well, what you mean? My daughters are like number one to me. And obviously that's not the answer that a woman wants to hear who's getting married. And when you trying to reconcile what the Bible says around like the husband, the wife, the children, and kind of that family order, you also got to reconcile like, well, how does that look? Because this is what God is saying. But there's there was a very real tension point for me and you. But on my end of it, the tension point was, I'm like, I think I even said it. I'm like, you can leave. Not like I wasn't kicking her out, but I was saying like, no, but like you can literally leave me. Like, but my daughters, like they're my daughters. Like they're gonna still be my daughters, whether you here or whether you go. And so for me, it was kind of like, so I'm trying to understand how I'm supposed to put you before them when one, they didn't ask me to be here, and they only get an option. Well, that's not necessarily true, but technically they only get an option at one dad, but it's not necessarily true. At least with one, the other one of them got a stepdad now. And so that was like a point of like tension for me when we were in that argument where I didn't understand what was actually being asked of me as a parent. And for you.
Oh no, it was just frustrating because I come from a household where I don't know, it was very clear that my parents, loved and supported one another and then their children. So it didn't make sense to me at all, because that's not a family dynamic I had come from or even understood. So yeah, I don't know, it just didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And the reality is it wasn't gonna make sense. Like there's no world in which our two sides gonna completely understand. Like at that moment where it's kind of like, well, no, like there's things where it's just kind of like, well, I don't get that because that wasn't the life, right? Mm-hmm. For you versus my life. And so we had to figure out, okay, so what does this mean though? Because I remember that being like a real hot spot. Like if there was anything that made us second guess going to the altar, I remember that was one of them. Like we had to meet with Pastor John, then we had to go meet with Pastor Ron and Sister Anita at the Apple, because we was like, how's this supposed to work?
Yeah, it's something that I think people shouldn't take lightly. I think that people should really seek counsel and really be planful and intentional when dating someone who does have children.
Yeah, and I think I also think the conversation could be different too. I was marrying someone who had no children, right? And some people are blended families and they have children, and that's still its own thing. Yeah. But I also was marrying someone who had no children.
No frame of reference for certain things.
And I remember even that was some annoyances. I'd be like, well, you don't... I remember I used to... we would argue about certain stuff. And I was like, when you had kids, I'm going to see if you think like this. When you have yours, and if your mindset thinks like me. Not around the first, it was just around other conversations we would have. And so that was a real contention point for us. And ultimately... It was really hard. I think it was harder for me in relationship because I remember like that when I had to reconcile and just deal with, at the end of the day, no matter what decisions I made, it goes outside of God's created order. God's created order is still God's created order. And so when I had to come to the terms of like, all right, so it does go my wife and my children. And we had to wrestle through like, well, at the end of the day, when you're talking about who comes first, like adults equally look at children as like, no, we got to take care of the kids.
It's not the conversation about like whose plate do you make first, or the conversation about like who gets, whose door you open first. Like it's not necessarily that conversation. I think more so the conversation should be centered on the way in which we're prioritizing family, not in terms necessarily the way we're prioritizing like material stuff or those kind of dynamics. And
I'll just say this before I get to where it was hard for me. I do want to just like, one thing I do shout my wife out for is because one of the things that obviously when you're dating, you don't understand, right? Mm-hmm. So she's saying I should be first and we're dating and I literally was like, man, this woman is like super selfish. Like what in the world is she talking about? But one of the things, because you don't know what the future, right. I don't know, but one of the things like, and being married to you, like the kids always come first, period. Like it's always like, all right, we got to think about the household. It's always like, all right, I'm about to order this and I'm about to order the kids this too. It's always, hey, babe, make sure you were always saying, babe, make sure you have date nights with the girls. Hey, babe, make sure you do something with the girls. Hey, babe, make sure you do something with the boys. Like you always are a person. So like the conversation now, even as we're talking about it, I'm like, it still has its issues in blending the family. Yeah. But if I knew what I knew about you that I know now, that conversation wouldn't have had to be as hard as it was. Yeah. But it was the unknown of like, what are you actually saying to me when you say you should be before my daughters? Yeah. And so shout out to you, man, for really handling this situation in a really, really well way and actually giving an example of what it looks like. But I had to struggle because your 5-year-old daughter and your 6-year-old daughter and your 7-year, they don't get that. You know what I'm saying? And I remember that was a hard point where her and I would have, like later on, where we had some beef, my teenager, my oldest, and it was just kind of like that, hearing that hurt her because she's like, you're my dad. Like, I don't understand. Like, I just heard you tell me that, like your wife is before me. And it's like, and they don't, that's a hard conversation for.
Also, the way you might have said it.
I don't even remember.
Yeah, I'm sure your frame of reference to the 6 or 7 year old, our daughter. Yeah, I could only imagine the way you said it 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably. And so that was rough, man. That was rough. But we did talk through that, work through that. Eventually, I was like, all right, listen, if this is what God says the order is, if y'all know me, I'm always going to be like, at the end of the day, whatever bed I made, I don't get to step outside of what God wants. And so I got to figure out what that looks like now in light of what God has said. And so we worked through that part. And obviously we got to the altar, you know, and it was rocky, but we got there.
We got there.
But then now we're married. And now we got to actually see, before we was arguing about the theory of a blended family. Now we actually got to blend this family. And I don't know, you tell me kind of your thoughts into the actual process.
I mean, I guess it just depends on which part we're talking about. There's portions like day-to-day stuff, naturally just taking on in a household, because I'm the woman, I'm the wife, and we have little girls. So there were certain things naturally just, I don't know. I do know how their hair was getting done prior to being married. Sometimes one of your friends was doing it, and sometimes it wasn't getting done. And then sometimes you would try to do it, right? So like certain things,
raw, though.
You was all right, and they looked rough and they needed help.
I was raw.
And so,
I was raw.
Okay, and so like those kind of things naturally beginning to do their clothes, like the daily taking care of them. That was easy. Okay. You know what I mean? Because those are things that I would do with any kid. Like, I love kids. So like that's normal. I think for me, some of the difficulties were more around just like, where do I fit in with them? Tension points like what situations is cool for me to go to, being a new wife versus like it would be you and a mom, but I'm not their mom. And this is one of those situations where it's like they're being honored with their parents. So like navigating those kind of things wasn't the same as navigating like, oh, you need new clothes.
Got you. Yeah. I know we would have, like you said, that like navigating like what to be involved in. I know there would be times where I would have to say to you like, but I had to say to you like, but I'm not doing that to you. Like, I'm trying to get you involved in everything. Like, I'm inviting you into all of the worlds, but it still wasn't the easy.
It's still a tension point to go somewhere, even if you're invited by one person, not always knowing if everybody is inviting you and okay with you being there.
Yeah, because I mean, the reality is not all the situations were peaceful in the beginning. And so that also brought a level of strife and contention and struggle that we had to process and deal with. And then obviously when it came down to the adding the kids into the family, that was another like, what is this gonna look like? Because now my wife is, and we already talked in the last episode and 2 episodes ago around like, then when we lost Devin, that it was hard for you to actually love the girls the way that you desire to love them, because they reminded you of what you didn't have with our daughter. But now it's like, and then we have the boys, and it's like, okay, so now you got the boys. Like, what's that about to look like? Because I would always say to my wife, like, 2 is yours. All 4 are mine. So it's like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting I say that. I remember one of the, like, being pregnant with Dylan, or just like in general, one of the things that I struggle with a lot of is like recognizing that a lot of stuff was new for me but wasn't for you. And so, you know, it just that different dynamic. Like, I think in my head there are points in life as a woman where you have a fairy tale or an expectation on how you perceive the world being, and realizing like in marriage that would never be, like, you know what I mean, like this would never be the first time we had a kid together, like our first child together. You know, our oldest son, it wouldn't be the first time we watched that person say dada or mama. It wouldn't be, you know what I mean. So recognizing that like all of those first together were just all of those first our son was just my first. They weren't your first.
But yeah, I remember too, like around that, like we had to end up having a conversation because in your grief and as you were grieving like the lack of the first and things, I mean, you had a conversation and I was just like, babe, like the reality is a lot of these things I'm experiencing for the first time too, because obviously I wasn't married to my daughter's mothers. And so I wasn't in their household all the time. We weren't together like that. So it was a lot of things that I just heard about that I actually would miss, right? And so I remember I just shared that with you in the sense of like, the reality is, yes, there are some things that we'll never ever get first of, right? But there are a lot of things, and especially in those beginning stages, that was like, no, like I never did that. Like I never experienced that. I never seen that. Like my boys didn't, my daughters didn't sleep with me every night. They didn't lay on my chest every day, you know what I'm saying? Like the boys do, because I wasn't in the house. Like that's the struggle of a not together household is It is a lot of those moments and things that you don't get to see that I was actually getting to experience for the first time. That whole family dynamic of raising a child together was the first for me. But obviously that was just me trying to at least comfort some of the realities, right, of like the griefs that you were struggling with when it came to some of those first. But talk about some of the actual struggles that you felt when it came to the shared parenting, when it came to things like the discipline, when it came to things like the decision making. Like what were some of the things that you experienced, and we can talk about kind of like how we work through those things.
Gotcha. I think just some stuff to start off felt very like there were certain things that I should have known that I didn't know yet regarding discipline. So like as a parent now, knowing like you learn your kids over time, so you have the experience to like mess up first, right? And so like not a lot of opportunities. It didn't feel like a lot of opportunities to like to misstep when it came to discipline. Like, is it my role? What does fussing look like? What does punishment or timeout or restrictions look like? You know what I mean? I never whooped the girls, right? So, but what does that look like in terms of a level of physical discipline? And so like not knowing that, and I don't think we had conversations before getting married about that specifically. So in navigating it in real time, huge opportunities to like mess up and potentially offend you or one of the mothers.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we got to learn we didn't have those conversations. And that's why in any parenting situation, like whether it's blended or not, these are conversations that you should be having. Because it don't matter if it's a blended family or not. If we think differently about discipline, we gonna beef about how we gonna discipline even our own kids. Now, obviously, there's another level of, it's one sense where it's like, well, I'm just got to beef with you, right? If we don't agree on the discipline. It's another thing where it's like, no, I got to go hear this over here. And then now if that becomes a beef, and now, you know what I'm saying? Like it adds more layers of opinions on what happens inside our household that we definitely had to navigate through and work through. But like you said, we didn't have real conversations around discipline, because we did think much differently about discipline, period. And we definitely still have different opinions on discipline. I think we're a lot closer than we started as far as like what discipline looks like, and trying different things around discipline. I think we're a lot closer than before, because before I knew one way of discipline. So I'm like, what you talking about, man? They need to get a whooping, period. And so obviously I've grown in parenting to recognize that don't work.
Not all whoopings are needed.
are needed. But I don't know, what's some other things that made it difficult to have the blended family that we had to talk through and work through?
Different stuff. We had to talk through like schedules for like holidays, schedules for like weekends, talking through that, what that looked like if we wanted to do something as a family. How do we ensure all the kids are together to do that family activity? So navigating those, that ended up being conversations over time that we have been able to schedule well. But starting off,
conflict.
That was conflictious.
And I think, and if we're being honest, there was like just unrealistic expectations of me. So like, man, so one of the things that I carry, and I'm gonna always carry it at the end of the day, is just the internal guilt that not even guilt, just it's something internal that is like, man, I never want. So the way our household is set up is it's 3 children in our household, and then my oldest is not in our household, and so I always carry that, like, I never want my oldest, like, because that's my first kid, like that. At the end of the day, I love all of my kids the same, but there's one still that's always the first that comes out and makes you a dad. You know what I'm saying? The most complicated one too. If you're watching this, you are the most complicated. But but love you. And there's so many things that her birth brought to me, and it's like, man, I never want her to feel that she's not a part of what's happening in this house. And so it created tensions and unrealistic expectations, because I'm wanting us to do the extra mile things to make sure that she felt included. And some stuff just didn't make sense. Like, it just wasn't realistic to actually do it. And I think in the beginning, there were so many things happening in that relationship that I wanted to make sure that couldn't have been a thing. And so I had to grow, obviously, not to not caring, but I had to grow into realizing, like, some stuff just it's not possible. And you would say that, but earlier in the marriage, I wasn't trying to hear it with you. Like, I'm just being honest. I'm like, whatever, man. Like, we gonna figure this out. And then obviously, like you said, like, we figured it out in this season where it's like, oh no, like some people, like, if Selena go home to her mom house or go to her mom house on the weekend, like, oh, she about to just miss out. Like, like, we not about to be making 50,000 turns and signals trying to figure out how to make it all work. But that was in the beginning. I was like, no, all of my kids need to be together for this.
And that produced, like, in terms of, for me at least, that was stressful. Trying to coordinate stuff and not knowing potentially which one of our kids would be present, would be able to come, if we would be able to do it. Like that was stressful. That was annoying, like, but it was stressful. In a way that back then I didn't realize it was stressful, because I would be like all anxious about, oh, we got to pick up this one of the kids at this specific time. If we late, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen? Like, I would have those kind of thoughts. And I didn't need to have those kind of thoughts, but that's what kind of stress it was for me, to make sure that, like, our schedule was scheduling. Yeah.
Because holidays is holidays. Like, at the end of the day, shared parenting has shared parenting rules. And no matter how much you flow in those rules is one thing, but there's still rules that exist in them. And what that means is that sometimes it's like, oh, we going to dinner at 3? Oh man, I ain't getting Eliana till 6. Dang, but it's at 3. So it's like, so then you like, dang, so do I leave in the middle of dinner to go get her at 6? Or do we just be like, yeah, you missing out on this one? Or dad, it's at dinner it's on a Friday at 5? Like, well, our daughter Selena go to her mom's house on Thursdays and Fridays. So it's like, so shoot, do we do it early? It's like, nah, she gonna have to just, she gonna miss this one. Right. And so it's just that's always been. And then when they grew up, that became even harder to figure out the schedule, even with them.
Yeah, because they have a one day a week that they spend together, the girls together. We got one day a week. Like, if we go from, it ain't even a full day. Yeah. Like, we got 18 hours.
Where all four kids
are together.
Are on a regular basis.
At one time in one house, potentially.
It'd be varying.
Activity they do.
Because one child that she goes to her mother on Thursday, Fridays, comes home on Saturday. The other child comes here Friday, Saturday, goes home Sunday evening. And so it's like, you got this one small window when all 4 of our kids are in the house at the same time. And this kid's going to college now, so that window's that time even smaller now. But it's just a constant adjustment of trying to figure out, okay, there's a new schedule with this kid. It's a new schedule with that kid. It's a new thing we working through with this kid. It's a new thing.
Yeah. No, so just what you said about adjustment. I think one of the things that blended families, like, inception should agree to be is recognize that there's this level of flexibility. They're just going to have to be. Like certain traditions may not hold. Certain ideas that you have about what life will look like may not happen. And like coming to terms where you're okay with that. And then potentially creating the reality of what could happen, even if it can only happen in that season, right? Because sometimes as families, we get, we hold on to our specific traditions that may not be realistic for the dynamic of a blended family, especially as you add people into the blended family. You know, the more people you add to the family, the more dynamics that are there. And if you're flexible, then, or at least for me, the more flexible we became, the less anxious and stressed I got about certain things. Because it's like, we just gonna go with the flow. And just, if everybody here, we all do whatever, you know, and we identify times where we can schedule, hey, we all gonna be here for these 4 hours and do this one thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's just and if there's any advice that I can give in some of those things is, man, really just not dealing with the internal stuff that you got going on, because one of the things is like, even when you have all these kids, like you never want one kid to think that, like the idea is that whoever the child that is not the other child's parent, that they would feel some way if the children of the parent is getting something that they're not getting. And that's the idea. So because that's the idea, you're trying to balance that. And so it's like, but it's like, you have to just really get to a place of acknowledging, knowing your heart, knowing your motives, and recognizing, like, don't create more unrealistic things. If all your kids were if all four of our kids were by each other, we would still be prioritizing based upon kids' needs, based upon what they got to do. Period. You know,
that's what you do.
That's what you do. So it's like, you can't then be like, well, no, but you would do that if they were in in your house. And so sometimes you got to just get out of your own head and not allow those thoughts to create extra conflict, because now you're trying so hard to not leave this open window of thinking. And that was just, again, one of those things that I had to deal with. I mean, it took years. Like, this was like it's still things that I have to process through and work through. Like, Selena is in basketball and the boys are in boxing and wrestling, and they just so happen to be, when she got in basketball, her games on the same day that the boys go to boxing and wrestling. And so it's like, well, I want to make sure that my daughter know, like, no. So it's like, hey, babe, I need you to take the boys to boxing and wrestling so I can go to at least one game a week where I can, and making sure that she feels like. But in my head, it's kind of like, my first thought was, how do I get at every one of her games and every one of the boys' games? How do I make that happen?
Yeah, and as a parent, that's unrealistic. Like, when you have kids in multiple activities, doing multiple things, it's so, you can't be at everything. That is the beauty of having another parent. Because they y'all kids. You know what I mean? Like, you can't always show up because you're only one person, especially if you got more than one kid. And so that's just the reality. I think the other dynamic of that is also, like, one of the things I don't think families talk about, but the kids inside of a home, if they see the additional things or the going out of the way that it appears is happening for another child, sometimes it causes the ones in the home to feel some kind of way. Especially if they don't feel or understand the intentionality happening day to day in the house.
Right. And that's and we do understand too, as we're talking about our story, there's times where y'all can, but all the kids could be in the house, but you know, our situation is not like that. But that was a real thing. It's like, well, they see that too, and what they think there's favoritism towards the other one.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You know, the one outside the house is saying these people are the favorite, and the ones in the house are saying that person is the favorite. We know a lot about that.
But kids think that I grew up with two other sisters in the house, right, as the youngest, and in our house it didn't matter. Like, everybody thought somebody else was the favorite.
Everybody thought you was the favorite.
Well, yeah, but I wasn't trying to say.
I'm about to say, I know that your sister said that.
But what I'm saying is, we were all in the same house. It wasn't necessarily, that kind of dynamic on who's here. So what I'm saying is, like, siblings may potentially feel some type of way about other siblings, depending on whatever.
Got you. But we don't want to leave on a lot of like struggling. Like, what are some joys of a blended family? Because there's positives too. I think one of the things you already said is like there's two parents, right? So that's and so when you have a blended family, there's more parents that can be available.
Pickups. Yeah. No, I think that's a huge joy, or just perk. I don't know. But when it comes to blended, having somebody else available to assist in pickups and drop-offs and signing documents and getting kids to appointments and just like it's a lot raising kids to make sure they can go to school and get all their homework and stuff done. So having other hands to assist with that is like a perk. Like, I recommend that. Yeah. Yes. Another perk is just, or at least for me, it's been a joy to like be able to be a part of our daughters' lives. Like really, really has been just wonderful to be able to shepherd, disciple, baptize, like to have that kind of relationship is honestly dope. And for me, not having children prior to, this isn't like a yay perk, but like kind of like when you're an intern and like you mess up on other people so you can get it right. Like our daughters have been the ones, even like your younger kids, you mess up with the older ones, but like our daughters, you know, I've learned a lot in terms of how to parent and how to lead and how to disciple by failing in some ways with them. That has helped me later on as they gotten older, but also with the boys.
Yeah. And so I think that when we talk about blended families and our journey and our thing, I think the thing that if we could go back and do it again, we would still do what we did because the blended family is beautiful. It's a picture. Absolutely. It's a picture of the gospel at the end of the day where people of all different family lines and ethnic lines are coming together to become one big blended family that is united in the gospel. And so it's a beautiful picture when you work at it, just like marriage. When you work at it, it's a beautiful picture of the gospel. But the one thing that I would say what we would have definitely had to is we never had deep conversations around, because there's the practical conversations around practical things. But then, like you said, the grievings of the first, then there's the grief, the internal things that you don't even think about will exist until they're happening in that moment. And so we would just encourage couples that, man, don't run from the blended family. However, make sure that you have real conversations around the practical, around the emotionals. Get with people that have to walk through the blended family so they can help you understand some things that you'll never know. Like the people that helped us, and they had no idea the things that would come up outside of she got to be first, and it's like, but nobody can know until you in it that. What in the world this is a thing right now? Like this is really a situation.
This is a situation. Something that who would have thought that would have been a situation? No, that's good to have those conversations. Absolutely, from as much as possible. But even while you're in it, like when something feels, one thing I wish I would have done prior is being willing to have the conversations as I was feeling something, even if I couldn't identify what it was.
Gotcha.
Like I didn't know it was grief that I was feeling. I didn't learn that till later, but I knew I was feeling something, right? I didn't know that there was a level of, jealousy I was feeling, even as I'm encouraging you to go on dates with the girls. That's like, whoa, when the last time I had a date? Like I need to say, what is this? Girl, don't
she get dated, y'all?
No, now that was a season we was
I just want them to know. I want nobody to hear that and be like, he don't date you. She get dated.
Yes, we go on dates. I got one plan for you coming up.
She get flued out, y'all.
I do
she
not.
Get flued out. She get flued out.
I'm waiting to get flued out. Do something.
You want me to fly you out? And this next episode we're gonna talk about is gonna be on finances. And I want you to ask me if you really want me to flude you out the way you feel about finances. Because I'll fly. I will fly you out. I have no problem fluding you out. But listen, guys, man, I hope we said something today, man, that just gave you some insight into what it means to have a blended family, things that can come up in a blended family, and just conversations that need to be had in order to make the blended family work. It is beautiful. The blended family is beautiful. You don't have to run from it, but you do have to be intentional to have conversations and be prepared for it. So listen, if this episode has helped you, do us a favor and hit the like button, the share button, the subscribe button. Listen, let other people know about a podcast that is helping relationships thrive and become healthy. And we'll see you next time on It's the Tanks.